So I have read 3 books since I last filmed a review. So rather than filming an individual review for each one, I thought I would do a big lump review in the form of recent reads. So I'm going to begin with Force of Circumstance by Simone, the sequel to Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter and The Prime of Life. This is not the edition I read. I read a library edition in library binding. This one I purchased for myself last week, secondhand, and it's quite a good edition, I'm going to say. I like the cover. Penguin books are always a good default to go with. But this was published in French in 1963, originally translated by Richard Howard. And as I said, it is the 3rd volume of her memoirs. It deals with her post-war experience. She takes us from the liberation of Paris to the early 1960s, when she and Sartre are not only famous, but because of political issues within France, they are also fearing for their lives. I think the most remarkable thing that stuck out to me in this novel was, Sartre's continuing friendship/feud with Camus, but also the fact that for a period of time they found it very difficult to rent a room in a hotel or to get an apartment, for the reason that landlords would not rent to them out of fear that the place would be bombed. And as I found out in this memoir, it was a well-founded fear. I also get an account of the love affairs that she had with American writer Eldern. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not familiar with the author, but the affair that she had with an American author that lasted several years and resulted in a book I have over there in the corner waiting for me, a collection of their love letters to each other. I think they eventually, when their affair was over, they eventually became good friends all the same. Also her affair with Landsman, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that as well. He appears to have had a much more profound effect on her life than Eldern. She ended up living with him for a while. They traveled, they lived together. He was a little bit younger than her, but it seemed to have been a fairly healthy relationship, I'm going to say. All the while she's, of course, continuing her relationship with Sartre. It's actually kind of funny because when Simone would go to the United States to visit Eldern, a woman whose name I'm forgetting now, but Sartre's lover, who lived in the States, would come across the ocean to stay in Paris with Sartre for a few months. I think at one point they actually did 6 months, and then she came back to France, but Sartre's lover did not want to leave. She eventually moved to Paris, even though Sartre told her not to, and that eventually led to the destruction of that relationship. So Force of Circumstance, I think, is likely my least favorite of the 3 memoirs detailing her life that Simone wrote. The first half of the book, I'm going to say, has the same tone as Prime of Life, and I really like that tone. But the second half kind of started to lose my interest. I can't help but wonder if it's because Simone was too close to the events that she was writing about. They lost a little bit of their hindsight, a little bit of that philosophical tone that the earlier memoirs have. A lot of it was about the war in Algeria. A lot of it was about her and Sartre's travels. The accounts of their trips to Brazil and China and Cuba, etc., were quite detailed and perhaps would be quite interesting to some people. I found them a little bit boring in the context of what I had previously been reading. Apart from Simone de Beauvoir's Force of Circumstance, I also made my way through Canada Always, The Defining Speeches of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, edited by Arthur Milnes, with commentaries by Tony Blair, Kim Campbell, Jean Chrétien, Christy Clark, Joe Clark, Stephen J. Harper, Paul Martin, Brian Mulrooney, Rachel Notley, and John N. Turner, and of course many others. If you're Canadian, you're going to recognize a lot of those names, hopefully all of them. If you're not, you're going to be wondering who these people are, but former prime ministers, former premiers, etc., and so on. So this is a collection of what the author felt to be important speeches made by former Canadian Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier. He is considered one of the founding fathers of Canada, up there with Alexander Mackenzie and so forth. He is largely credited with the shaping of Canada's system of governance with foreign policy. He was Prime Minister for a couple of decades. But this was kind of fascinating to read. It was actually lent to me, so this is not my book. I was very careful with it. Took the dust jacket off when I read. I think my favorite speeches in here were, first of all, his defense of Louis Riel. Louis Riel was a founding father of Manitoba. He was Métis. He led a couple of rebellions which eventually led to him being charged with treason and being executed by the government of the day, which led to a strain in relations between Métis people in Canada and French Canada and the federal government. But Laurier, as a fairly new MP, argues that based on legal precedents, based on the fact that there is no proof, the House should not expel Riel from his position as an MP because he did not appear on the date they summoned him. He argues based on a case that took place in Ireland, because actually what happened was Riel was elected by a riding in Manitoba. He eventually did go to the House of Commons to be sworn in and then quickly disappeared before he could be arrested, but there was some controversy in the House as to whether he should even be allowed to be sworn in. The other speech that I really appreciated in that volume was his speech on the death of Queen Victoria. Not elaborate, but very elegant and very well written, very well said. So the last book that I read was The Trial by Franz Kafka. This was my train read, just a battered up modern library edition, been on my shelf for quite a while. This is a book that I started reading the first few pages of as a teenager, but was immediately turned off by preconceived notions of it. I thought it was going to be this kind of depressing, confusing, convoluted story about this man who has been arrested and imprisoned and doesn't know why. That is not what I got here. I got something much better. Our main character is arrested, so to speak. He wakes up in his room one day to find men there telling him that he has been arrested, but he in fact gets to go about his normal everyday life. He is told that there is going to be a trial, that there are going to be interrogations, that he needs to get lawyers and get his papers together, and he does indeed get a lawyer. He starts trying to find people who can influence the court, because he is told that it's not about his innocence, it's not about the legal process, it's all about who you know. He is told that he does not have the right to access the law or to understand the law, and the interesting thing is that he resigns himself to this. He resigns himself to the fact that he is going to lose this trial, and yet he goes through the motions of fighting it. He does everything that he should be doing, but he knows that he's going to lose, and even though he doesn't understand what he's being charged with, after his initial questions, he kind of folds, he gives up, he does not ask what he is being charged with. He bows to the system, bows to the structures around him, and just literally gives up. He decides that it doesn't matter and his trial may drag on for years. He says he wants to win his trial. He says he wants his lawyers to work for him. But it doesn't seem as though he actually does. So my camera just cut out on me because I ran out of space on my phone to record, but I've uploaded everything to the laptop and I thought I would just turn this back on. I was Talking with the Trial by Franz Kafka, my Modern Library edition. I enjoyed it. It made for a relaxing train read, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something that is going to leave you feeling slightly lifeless and disappointed, but completely alive.